Amara. Where's Amara?
My daughter tried calling her grandma when I collapsed, but she dialed my billionaire ex and exposed the daughter I hid for years. When my 7-year-old daughter tried to call her grandma and accidentally dialed my billionaire ex instead, the secret I'd been hiding for 7 years exploded in a single terrified scream. Before I tell you how one misdial rebuilt and almost destroyed my entire life, thank you for pushing Mr. Steele Rich Stories past 2,000 subscribers. If you love stories that feel this real and this raw, do me a favor, hit share right now so more people can find these lessons the hard way, on screen, instead of in their own lives. My name is Angela Steele, and this is how it happened. That Tuesday evening started like every other in our third-floor apartment above the laundromat on Washington Avenue. The rhythmic thump of industrial dryers below created a constant vibration through our floorboards. A heartbeat I'd grown so used to that silence would have felt wrong. Steam from the pot of boxed mac and cheese curled toward the water-stained ceiling, while I stirred with one hand and scrolled through overdue notices on my phone with the other. The electric company wanted $247, past due. The internet bill showed $63 with a disconnection warning. My bank account held $112 until Friday's paycheck from the warehouse. Mama, is indigo more purple or more blue? Amara sat at our scratched kitchen table, her crayons arranged in perfect color order, a habit she'd developed on her own, never learned from me. She held 2 crayons up to the flickering overhead light, studying them with an intensity that made my chest ache for reasons I couldn't quite name. "More blue, baby," I answered, though my attention stayed split between the bubbling pasta and the calculation of which bill could wait another week. Amara nodded solemnly, adding the indigo crayon to what looked like a diagram of some sort. She'd been drawing blueprints lately instead of princesses, creating elaborate floor plans for houses we'd never live in. Her grey eyes, nothing like my brown ones, everything like someone else's, narrowed in concentration as she selected the next color with careful deliberation. The exhaustion hit me in waves these days, constant and relentless. 5 a.m. Warehouse shifts at Richmond Logistics, where I loaded packages onto conveyor belts until my shoulders screamed. Home by 3:30 to grab Amara from after-school care, where I paid by the minute for any late pickup. Remote customer service from 4 to 8, my laptop balanced on a TV tray while I helped people reset passwords and troubleshoot software, my voice cheerful. Even when my body begged for sleep, weekends meant cleaning offices downtown, $40 per floor, cash only, no questions asked. "Mama, why do you work so much?" Amara asked suddenly, not looking up from her drawing. "Because I love you more than anything," I said automatically, the same answer I always gave. "Morgan's mom only works one job," she observed, switching from indigo to forest green with practiced precision. "She picks Morgan up right when school ends. They go to the park sometimes." The familiar guilt pressed against my ribs like a physical weight. Morgan's mom hadn't made the choices I'd made. Morgan's mom probably hadn't spent 7 years looking over her shoulder, changing phone numbers annually, paying everything in cash when possible to avoid leaving digital footprints that someone with enough resources might follow. The first sharp pain struck without warning. It started behind my sternum, a pressure like someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed with an iron fist. I gripped the counter, knuckling white, waiting for it to pass. Stress, I told myself. Exhaustion. Too much coffee on an empty stomach. Too many consecutive days without adequate sleep. The usual suspects in my daily survival routine. "Mama?" Amara's voice sounded distant, muffled, like she was speaking underwater. "I'm okay, baby. Just tired." But I wasn't okay. The pain spread like spilled ink across my chest, radiating down my left arm with fingers of fire. The kitchen tilted slowly, as if someone had grabbed one corner of the room and lifted it toward the ceiling. The mac and cheese pot handle turned cold under my palm despite the heat rising from the stove. 3 days earlier, at the warehouse, I'd nearly fainted while scanning packages on the loading dock. Janelle Carter, the only co-worker who ever asked how I was doing, really asked, not the automatic greeting people toss around, had grabbed my arm when I swayed dangerously close to the conveyor belt. "Girl, when's the last time you saw a doctor?" she'd demanded, her eyes full of genuine concern. "You look exhausted, like beyond tired, like sick." "I'm fine," I'd insisted, pulling away to scan the next box, the beep of the scanner punctuating my denial. "I just need more sleep." Doug Miller, our floor supervisor, had noticed the pause in my rhythm from his position by the time clock. "Steele, we're not paying you to socialize. You're 12 packages behind quota and the shift's only half over." I'd pushed through that day, like every other day, because sick days meant no pay, and no pay meant choosing between electricity and groceries, between rent and Amara's school supplies, between surviving and drowning. Now in my kitchen, the same sensation returned but magnified tenfold. The room wasn't just tilting, it was spinning, slow and nauseating, like being on a carousel that wouldn't stop. The drier thumps from downstairs synchronized with the thundering in my ears, creating a rhythm that felt like my own heartbeat trying to escape my body. "Mama!" Amara's chair scraped against linoleum, the sound sharp and terrible. Her small face appeared in my peripheral vision, those grey eyes wide with terror I'd never wanted her to experience. "Get the phone," I managed to whisper, each word requiring enormous effort. My knees buckled beneath me. The floor rushed up to meet me, or I fell down to meet it. I couldn't tell which anymore, couldn't distinguish up from down, couldn't focus on anything except the crushing weight on my chest. The impact rattled my teeth, sending pain shooting through my hip. "Call Grandma Rosa." Rosa Steele lived 40 minutes away in Riverside Heights, the neighborhood where I'd grown up before everything changed, before I'd learned that love could be both the best and worst thing to happen to you. My mother, with her soft hands and worried eyes, who still set a place for me at Sunday dinner even though I rarely made it, who asked careful questions about Amara's father that I never fully answered. She'd panic if she saw me like this, but she'd come. She always came when I needed her, even when I couldn't explain why I'd disappeared for 2 months 7 years ago, returning with a newborn and no father in sight, my eyes hollow and my heart broken. Amara's hands shook as she grabbed my phone from the counter where I'd left it beside the overdue notices. Through the growing fog in my brain, through the tunnel vision that was narrowing my world to a pinpoint, I heard her small voice, high and terrified, and trying so hard to be brave. "Call Grandma Rosa. Call Grandma Rosa." The phone's digital assistant responded with its artificially pleasant tone, the cheerful voice obscene in its normalcy. "Calling Cassian." "No." The word screamed through my mind but couldn't reach my lips, couldn't force itself past the constriction in my throat. Not him. Anyone but him. 7 years of careful distance, 7 years of hidden truths, 7 years of protecting myself and my daughter from a world too big and bright and dangerous for people like us, about to shatter because of a misheard voice command. The phone had remembered him. Of course it had. Old phones transferred data to new ones, contacts buried in digital archives but never truly deleted. His name sitting in my emergency contacts from a lifetime ago when he'd insisted on being there, back when I'd believed in forever and happy endings, and love that could survive anything. "Hello?" His voice filled my kitchen through the speaker, deeper than I remembered but unmistakably him, carrying the weight of boardrooms and authority and a life I'd deliberately walked away from. Cassian Crowe, the man who'd built an empire from nothing, the man who'd loved me before he knew what his last name could buy, the man who'd told me he needed space to figure out his new life, who'd never known that our last night together had created the miracle now crying into my phone. In a Manhattan conference room 800 miles away, Cassian Crowe stood frozen, The presentation he'd been delivering to potential investors, something about expanding his technology firm's European operations, projected revenue growth, market penetration strategies, dissolved into background noise, became meaningless sounds as he stared at his phone. Harper Lane, his executive assistant for the past 4 years, had slipped him the phone with a confused expression, her perfectly professional demeanor cracking slightly. The contact name Angela had appeared on his screen like a ghost from another life, a name he'd trained himself not to search for online, not to wonder about, not to miss. He'd almost declined the call. 7 years of silence should have stayed silent. 7 years meant she'd moved on, built a life, probably married someone normal who worked 9 to 5 and came home to dinner on the table. But something, instinct maybe, or the memory of how she'd looked the last time he'd seen her, tears streaming down her face as she'd walked away from his apartment without explanation, made him answer. Now a child's voice filled his ear, high and terrified and so young it made his heart stop. "My mommy fell down. She won't get up. Please help us." The conference room, the investors, the multi-million-dollar deal on the table, everything ceased to exist except that small, desperate voice. "What's your name, sweetheart?" He kept his voice steady even as his hand started to shake, even as 12 investors behind the glass wall exchanged confused glances. Behind him, through the transparent conference room wall, 12 investors waited for him to return to the presentation. They could wait forever. Amara, the little girl sobbed, the name punctuated by hitching breaths. Amara Steele, Angela's last name. Angela had a daughter. Angela had a daughter who sounded roughly 6 or 7 years old, and the math began calculating in his head automatically, unwanted, impossible. "Amara, where are you? What's your address?" His fingers flew across his phone, texting Harper even as he talked, muscle memory from years of crisis management taking over. "Can you tell me where you live?" 442 Washington Avenue, apartment 3C. Above the loud machines, his fingers flew across his phone screen, texting Harper with one hand while keeping the call connected. The message was brief, urgent. "Call 911. Send to 442 Washington Ave, apartment 3C, medical emergency. Now." Harper's response came immediately, on it. "Amara, is your mommy breathing?" He forced himself to ask the question calmly, professionally, like this was just another crisis to manage, and not his entire past colliding with his present in the worst possible way. I don't know. The panic in her voice escalated, spiraling toward hysteria. "Okay, sweetheart, it's okay. You're doing so well. Can you put the phone next to her, right by her head?" Rustling sounds, fumbling, then he could hear it. Labored breathing, too fast, too shallow, the sound of someone in distress. His chest constricted in sympathy, in terror, in something he couldn't name. Angela. Her name broke from his throat like a prayer, like a curse, like the answer to a question he'd stopped asking years ago. "Angela, can you hear me? It's Cassian. Help is coming. Hold on, please hold on." A weak moan in response, barely audible. She was conscious, barely. She was alive, for now. "Angela, please, stay with me. Stay with Amara." He was already moving, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair, leaving the conference room without explanation or apology. Harper fell into step beside him immediately, laptop abandoned, reading the situation in his face with the efficiency that made her invaluable. "Car. Now," he commanded as they reached the elevator. "Private jet. Whatever it takes to get me there fastest." Harper was already on her phone, coordinating with the driver, the pilot, the impossible logistics of crossing 800 miles in the shortest time possible. Back in the apartment, he kept talking through the phone, to Amara, to Angela, to anyone who might be listening in whatever cosmic sense. "Amara, You're being so brave. Your mommy is going to be okay. Can you unlock the door for when help comes? The ambulance people will need to get inside." "It's already unlocked," the little girl whispered, and he heard shame in her voice, like this was somehow a failing. "Mommy says the lock is broken. The landlord won't fix it." Rage flashed through him. Angela living somewhere with a broken lock. Angela collapsed on a floor. Angela with a daughter she'd never told him about, struggling alone in ways he could have prevented if he'd only known. But the rage could wait. Everything could wait except getting to them, except making sure they were safe. Sirens wailed through the phone speaker, growing louder, closer. "They're coming, Amara. The helpers are coming. You hear those sirens? They're coming for your mommy. Mommy's eyes are closed. That's okay. She's resting. You were perfect, sweetheart. You saved your mommy. You're so brave." The apartment door burst open. He heard it through the phone. Paramedic voices, professional and urgent, calling out medical jargon he half understood. Equipment sounds, the click and beep of monitors, the rustle of emergency supplies. "Sir," a male voice addressed him through the phone. "Are you a relative? He paused, the elevator descending toward the parking garage. What was he? "I'm on my way. That's my—" Another pause, longer this time. "Please, just help them. Help her." The line went dead. Cassian stood in the elevator of his office building, the phone gripped so tightly his knuckles went white. Harper stood silent beside him, already pulling up flight schedules on her tablet, already solving problems before he could articulate them. Back in the apartment, as paramedics lifted me onto a stretcher, as Amara clutched a teddy bear someone had produced, from somewhere, as oxygen masks and 4 lines turned my quiet life into a medical emergency, the last clear thought I had before the darkness claimed me completely was the sound of his voice. Cassian had said my name like he had 7 years ago, like it was the only word that mattered, like I was the only person in his world despite the empire he'd built, the success he'd achieved, the life he'd created without me. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me was the voice of the man I'd loved, the man who didn't know he had a daughter, yelling my name like he was losing me for the 2nd time. The first thing I noticed was the smell, that unmistakable combination of disinfectant and floor wax that could only mean hospital. The second thing was the rhythmic beeping somewhere to my left, electronic and insistent, marking time in a way that felt both comforting and ominous. My eyelids felt weighted, like someone had placed coins on them, but I forced them open anyway. Fluorescent panels above me came into focus slowly, too bright, too clinical. And 4 line ran from my right hand to a bag of clear fluid hanging from a metal pole. Monitors surrounded my bed, displaying numbers and waves I didn't understand, but that someone, somewhere, was certainly watching with professional detachment. There she is. A warm voice made me turn my head carefully, every movement feeling like it required conscious effort. A nurse in purple scrubs smiled at me, her badge reading Tasha Nguyen, RN. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the sort of face that probably calmed terrified patients every single day. "Welcome back, Miss Steele. You gave everyone quite a scare." "What?" My throat felt like sandpaper, raw and dry. She quickly produced a cup of water with a straw, supporting my head while I sipped. The cool liquid was the most wonderful thing I'd ever tasted. "You had what we call a cardiac arrhythmia episode," Nurse Nguyen explained, checking the monitors as she spoke with practiced efficiency. "Your heart decided to throw its own little rebellion. Lucky for you, the paramedics got to you quickly. That phone call probably saved your life." The phone call. Memories crashed back like a tidal wave. The kitchen floor, Amara crying, the digital assistant misunderstanding Cassian's voice through the speaker, saying my name like he'd never stopped thinking about it. My heart rate spiked immediately, causing one of the monitors to chirp in protest. "Easy now," the nurse soothed. "Your heart's been through enough excitement. Try to stay calm." But calm was impossible, because if Cassian had been on that phone call, if he'd heard Amara's voice, if he'd done the math that any intelligent person would do, then everything I'd carefully hidden for 7 years was about to explode. Mommy. Before Nurse Nguyen could react to the monitor's alarm, before I could prepare myself, a small hurricane burst through the door and launched itself at my bed. Amara's face was puffy from crying, her usually neat braids now fuzzy with escaped strands. She pressed herself against my side, careful of the wires and tubes but desperate for contact, her small body trembling. "Baby, I'm okay," I whispered into her hair, breathing in her familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and crayon wax. "I'm right here. Mama's right here. The strangers took you away." She sobbed into my hospital gown, her words muffled but anguished. "They put you on a rolling bed and wouldn't let me come in the loud truck. But the man on the phone said you'd be okay. He promised you'd be okay, and he kept talking to me until Grandma came. The man on the phone." Cassian had stayed on the line with my terrified daughter while I was unconscious, while paramedics worked on me, while my entire carefully constructed world was falling apart. The thought created a strange warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with medical equipment or cardiac episodes. "You were so brave," I told her, stroking her back in the rhythm that had soothed her since infancy. "You saved me, baby. You called for help. You did everything exactly right." "I called the wrong person," she whispered, and the guilt in her voice shattered something inside me. The phone got confused. I said Grandma Rosa, but it called someone else. "I'm sorry, Mommy. No, sweetheart, you did everything right, everything. The phone just remembered someone from a long time ago, but it's okay. It all worked out." But inside, guilt ate at me like acid. What kind of mother lived so close to the edge that her 7-year-old had to save her life? What would have happened to Amara if I hadn't made it? If the paramedics had arrived too late? If that misdial hadn't brought help faster than waiting 40 minutes for my mother to drive from Riverside Heights? The foster system? My mother was 63, too old to raise another child from scratch. The choices I'd made to keep us afloat had nearly drowned us both. A knock interrupted my spiral of self-recrimination. A woman in a white coat entered, tablet in hand, her expression professionally neutral but not unkind. She was perhaps 45, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her movements efficient. "Miss Steele, I'm Dr. Melissa Harding. I've been overseeing your care since you arrived." She glanced at Amara, who pressed closer to me. "Is it all right if we discuss your condition with your daughter present?" I nodded, knowing Amara needed to hear that I would be okay, that this wasn't going to happen again, even if I wasn't entirely sure of either thing myself. Dr. Harding pulled up a chair, her body language suggesting this wouldn't be a quick consultation. "You experienced what we call stress-induced cardiomyopathy. In simpler terms, your heart has been under so much strain from exhaustion and chronic stress that it essentially started to malfunction." She turned her tablet toward me, showing an image of a heart with areas highlighted in different colors. "See these regions? They're showing signs of damage from chronic overwork and stress. You're 29 years old, Miss Steele, but your cardiovascular system is behaving like it belongs to someone 20 years older." 29. The number hung in the air. I'd been 22 when I'd left Cassian, when I'd discovered I was pregnant, when I'd made the choice to raise Amara alone rather than trap him or beg for scraps of his new billionaire life. "Will she have to stay here?" Amara asked in a small voice, her hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "For a few more days," Dr. Harding replied gently, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "We need to monitor her and make sure her heart rhythm stays stable. But more importantly—" She turned back to me, and her expression became serious, almost stern. "You need to make significant lifestyle changes. The level of stress you've been carrying isn't sustainable. Your body gave you a warning." Next time, it might not be so generous. Next time. The implication was clear. Next time I might not wake up. Next time Amara might be calling 911 and getting no response. Next time my daughter might be the one finding me dead on the kitchen floor. The words hung in the air like a verdict, like a prison sentence, like the end of the only life I knew how to live. "Do you have a family who can help during your recovery?" Dr. Harding asked, making notes on her tablet with a stylus. "You'll need support when you're discharged. Someone to help with daily tasks, childcare, making sure you rest and take your medications properly." "My mother," I started to say, the words automatic. "Rosa Steele, she lives in Riverside Heights. She can—" The words died in my throat as a figure appeared in the doorway, backlit by the hallway fluorescence. Time seemed to slow, the way it had during my collapse, but this time I was painfully conscious of every detail, every impossible reality unfolding. Cassian Crowe stood there like he'd been carved from expensive marble and dressed by someone who'd never heard of discount stores. His charcoal suit probably cost more than I made in 2 months, though he'd rolled the sleeves to his elbows in a gesture I remembered from our college days, his tell when he was stressed or thinking hard about something. His dark hair was shorter now, touched with premature silver at the temples that somehow only made him look more distinguished, more successful, more out of reach. Behind him, clutching her worn leather purse like a lifeline, stood my mother. Rosa Steele looked every one of her 63 years, her face drawn with worry, her best church dress hastily thrown on, her hair not quite as neat as she usually kept it. She'd driven fast, I realized, probably broken speed limits to get here when the hospital called. The heart monitor beside my bed began beeping faster, a traitor betraying my body's reaction to seeing him here, in my world of medical debt and minimum wage reality, standing in a doorway like he owned the hospital, which, for all I knew, he might. "Mom," I managed weakly, my voice barely above a whisper. Then, because ignoring him would only make this worse, because pretending he wasn't there was impossible when he filled the entire doorway, "Cassian." My mother rushed forward, her practical shoes squeaking on the linoleum, but Amara got there first, turning to look at the stranger with those curious grey eyes that were unfortunately identical to his. "Are you the man from the phone?" she asked, her voice still shaky from crying but steadier now, curious. "The one who helped? The one who talked to me until the loud truck people came?" Every adult in the room seemed to hold their breath. Dr. Harding glanced between us, clearly sensing undercurrents but too professional to comment. My mother's hand found my shoulder, squeezing gently. She'd figured it out years ago, though we'd never discussed it directly, never put words to the truth that hung between us. Cassian's gaze moved from me to Amara, and I watched the exact moment recognition struck. Those grey eyes, his grey eyes, stared back at him from a smaller feminine face. The shape of her eyebrows, the way she tilted her head when asking questions, even the way she stood with one foot slightly forward, all him, all genetic echoes he couldn't possibly miss. His jaw tightened imperceptibly, the only sign of the emotional earthquake happening behind his composed exterior. But his voice remained steady, controlled, gentle. "Yes, I am. I'm glad your mommy is okay." "The phone called the wrong person," Amara said, that guilt creeping back into her voice like a stain spreading. "I wanted Grandma Rosa, but it called you instead. Are you mad at me?" The weight of the unspoken truth pressed down on all of us like a physical force. My mother's hand tightened on my shoulder. Dr. Harding's stylus hovered motionless over her tablet. Cassian's knuckles whitened briefly as his hands clenched, then deliberately relaxed. "I'm not mad at all," Cassian said, stepping fully into the room. The overhead lights caught the subtle gold watch on his wrist, the kind that whispered rather than shouted its price tag, the kind that cost more than my annual rent. He moved with the confidence of someone who owned whatever room he entered, but there was something different now, a careful awareness of the space he took up, a deliberateness to his movements. He was 32 now, I calculated quickly. The lean build from college had filled out into something more solid, more permanent. The boy who'd worn thrift store jeans and studied on scholarship had become a man who could buy the entire hospital if he wanted to. But his eyes, those steel-grey eyes that had once looked at me like I was his entire world, they hadn't changed at all. He crouched down to Amara's level, bringing himself face to face with the daughter he didn't know he had, the child whose existence I'd hidden for 7 years. "You were very brave today. You saved your mom's life. That makes you a hero." Amara studied him with that intense focus she applied to her crayons and blueprints, the same analytical gaze I'd seen Cassian use in photographs from business magazines. "How do you know my mommy?" "We went to college together," Cassian said simply. "The truth, but not the whole truth. We were good friends a long time ago." "Oh." She processed this information with visible concentration. "Mommy doesn't talk about college much. She says it was a long time ago in a different life." The words, innocent from a child's mouth, landed like stones. A different life. That's exactly what it had been. A life before wealth and distance and choices that couldn't be undone. "I spoke with your doctors," Cassian said, straightening and looking at me directly. His voice was carefully neutral, but I knew him well enough to hear the storm underneath. "They called me when you were first admitted. I'm still listed as your emergency contact." The revelation hit like cold water. 7 years. 7 years of new phones, new apartments, new jobs, new email addresses, and I'd never once thought to change that detail buried in my phone settings. Some part of me, buried beneath all the practical decisions and desperate calculations, had kept him there. The person to call when everything fell apart. Dr. Harding cleared her throat gently. "I'll give you some privacy to discuss things. Miss Steele, I'll be back this evening to go over your discharge plan and medications." She nodded to all of us and left, her footsteps fading down the hallway. "You were unconscious when you first arrived," Cassian continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "Unresponsive. They needed authorization for some procedures to start treatment. As your emergency contact, I provided that authorization." He paused. "I also handled the insurance situation." Handled. Such a simple word for what I knew must have been complicated. My insurance was basic, catastrophic coverage only, the kind with huge deductibles and limited networks. Handled probably meant he'd paid thousands of dollars without blinking. "Cassian," I started, but he held up a hand. "We can discuss it later. Right now, what matters is that you're okay." His voice softened. "You are okay, right?" They said stable, but stable covers a lot of ground. "I'm okay," I managed, though my mother's skeptical look suggested she disagreed with that assessment. Amara, with the impeccable timing children seem to possess for making situations more complicated, asked another question. "Are you a doctor? Is that why you know about hospitals and emergencies?" "No, sweetheart. I work with computers and technology. Business stuff that would probably bore you." "Oh." She tilted her head. "My mom works with computers sometimes too. At night, when people call because they forgot their passwords." The contrast hung in the air, unspoken but obvious. "He built technology empires. I helped people retrieve forgotten passwords for $12 an hour. My mother, bless her, recognized a powder keg when she saw one. Amara, honey, why don't we go find the cafeteria? I bet they have chocolate milk, and we should let your mommy rest. But I want to stay with mommy." "We'll bring her back something special," Rosa said firmly, already gathering Amara's small backpack from the corner chair. "Maybe some of those crackers she likes, or juice." Your mummy needs to talk to the doctors about grown-up things. Amara looked between all the adults, sensing undercurrents she couldn't name, reading the tension with the perceptiveness of children who've learned to monitor their parents' moods. Finally, she turned back to Cassian, her expression serious. "Thank you for helping my mummy," she said with the careful politeness I'd taught her. "When she fell down and I was really scared, you made me feel better. You kept talking to me until the helpers came." Something cracked in Cassian's expression, so quickly repaired I might have imagined it. His composure wavered for just a fraction of a second, and I saw the emotional impact hit him. "You made me feel better too," he said quietly, his voice rough. "You're a very special little girl, Amara." She beamed at him, that smile that lit up her entire face, then kissed my cheek with sticky sweet affection. "I'll bring you crackers, Mummy, the good kind." My mother paused at the door, giving me a look that said we'd be having our own conversation later, that she had questions and expected answers, that this situation was far from over. Then they were gone, the door clicking shut with a sound like finality. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls had stepped closer to witness whatever came next. Just me, Cassian, and 7 years of carefully maintained distance collapsed into nothing by one accidental phone call. He pulled the visitor's chair closer to my bed and sat down, movements deliberate and controlled. When he spoke, his voice was low, calculated, the tone of someone who'd spent years in boardrooms learning to negotiate impossible situations. "You have a daughter, not a question." A statement being processed, filed, analyzed. "She's 7 years old." I watched him do the math, and saw the moment understanding crystallized in those grey eyes. His hands resting on his expensive knees clenched slightly. 7 years, Angela. She's 7 years old." His voice remained level, but I knew him well enough to hear the storm underneath, the controlled fury of someone who'd just discovered a fundamental truth had been kept from him. Grey eyes. That thing she does with her head when she's thinking, the way she organizes things. Did you see how she straightened the edge of your blanket when she hugged you? Christ, even the way she says "really" with that little emphasis on the second syllable. He leaned forward, and for the first time since he'd walked in, I saw past the billionaire exterior to the man I'd once loved, the man I'd left without full explanation, the man whose heart I'd probably broken as thoroughly as he'd broken mine. Is she mine? The question hung between us like a blade waiting to fall. The monitor continued its steady beep, marking the seconds of my silence with mechanical precision. Through the window, I could see the city continuing its indifferent rhythm, people going about their lives, unaware that my carefully constructed world was about to collapse for the second time in 24 hours. The moment I'd been hiding from for 7 years had finally arrived, while I was strapped to a hospital bed, too weak to run, too tired to maintain the lie that had kept us safe but separate, protected but alone. "You think I stole 7 years from you?" The words left my mouth before I could stop them, hanging in the sterile air between us like an accusation I was making against myself. Maybe I did. Cassian's jaw worked silently for a moment, his hands still gripping his knees with controlled tension. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of every missed birthday, every first word, every milestone he'd never witnessed, every moment that could never be recovered. "I'm angry," he admitted quietly, the honesty more cutting than any accusation. "But mostly I'm stunned. 7 years, Angela. 7 years of questions I need answered. Not accusations, just why, how, when did you know?" The raw vulnerability in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. This was the Cassian I remembered from late-night conversations in our tiny apartment near campus, when we'd dissect our fears with surgical precision, laying them bare on the table between us like specimens to study, believing that honesty could solve anything. My mind drifted backward, past the hospital walls, past the years of silence, to a cramped studio apartment where everything had seemed possible despite having nothing. We'd been so young, 22 and full of dreams that cost nothing but meant everything. I could still see him clearly. Younger Cassian holding up his fork where cheap ramen noodles had congealed into something resembling modern art. "This has achieved consciousness," he declared with mock seriousness. "I think it's trying to communicate. That's what happens when you buy 12 for $1 packets." I'd laughed from my spot on our salvaged futon, surrounded by textbooks I'd bought third-hand, their margins filled with someone else's notes. Maybe if someone hadn't spent his last $20 on that business strategy book, Investment in Our Future, he'd interrupted, crossing the room to kiss me quietly. "When I build my empire, we'll eat real food, the kind that comes on actual plates." "Plates?" I'd gasped in mock shock. Let's not get too ambitious. We'd been so different even then. Him with his full scholarship to the business school, brilliant and hungry for success in a way that came from years in foster care, from knowing what it meant to have nothing. Me taking pre-med classes I'd eventually drop when the costs became impossible, working nights at a 24-hour diner to cover what my partial financial aid didn't. He'd grown up in the system until the crows found him at 15, gave him their name, gave him opportunities. I'd grown up in my mother's stable, loving home, never wanting for affection even when money was tight. But those differences had felt like strengths then. He'd quiz me with flashcards while I served him coffee at 3 a.m. during my diner shifts. I'd edit his business plans while he massaged the knots from my shoulders after 12-hour days on my feet. We'd been a team, us against the world, love filling all the gaps that money couldn't. Everything changed, I said quietly, pulling myself back to the present, to the hospital room, and the man sitting across from me who was both familiar and foreign. "When your biological father died," Cassian flinched slightly at the mention. His birth father, the man who'd abandoned him to foster care, had died and left him everything: a technology company, investments, a fortune built on patents and innovation. The irony hadn't been lost on either of us. The man who'd wanted nothing to do with his son had made him a billionaire posthumously. I remembered the funeral, though I'd stayed in the background, unsure of my place. The burial had been a blur of expensive black suits and inherited expectations. Cassian, barely 25, suddenly thrust into rooms full of board members who'd known him only as the foster kid, who got lucky but now had to treat him as their boss. Overnight, he'd gone from the scholarship student with big dreams to heir of a technology empire worth billions, his life becoming a nightmare of hostile takeover attempts, family drama he'd never asked for, and security issues that made normal life impossible. "They had a security consultation about you," he'd told me one night, 3 weeks after the funeral. We were in his new apartment, the one the estate lawyers had insisted he move into for safety reasons, all glass and steel, and nothing like our cozy studio. About us, the security. "Team thinks you could be a kidnapping target, or that someone might hurt you to get leverage over me and the company." I'd laughed it off then, but I'd seen how he'd stopped sleeping, how he'd check the locks 3 times before bed, how he'd flinch when photographers appeared from nowhere, shouting questions about inheritance and company direction. The pressure had crushed him slowly, like being buried under coins, each one valuable, but the accumulated weight suffocating. "Do you remember what you said?" I asked him now, in the hospital room where the truth seemed unavoidable. "During that phone call? The one that ended everything?" His eyes closed briefly. Every word. But I wondered if he really did. Memory was subjective, colored by intention and pain, and the stories we tell ourselves to survive. In his mind, I knew he'd been protecting me, being noble, sparing me from a dangerous, chaotic life. The call had come on a Tuesday evening. I'd been at the diner, on my break, eating leftover fries and studying anatomy diagrams. His voice through the phone had sounded tired, stretched thin, older than 25. "I need space to figure this out." His voice had been steady, professional almost, like he was closing a business deal. "This isn't the life I planned. The security risks, the constant scrutiny, the demands. It's not fair to ask you to wait while I learn how to be this person. You deserve better than being tied to someone who doesn't even know who he is anymore." What he'd said. What I'd heard. "You're not part of this new life. You don't fit in this world. I'm choosing the money over you. You said you didn't want to be tied down," I reminded him now, watching his reaction carefully. "That you needed to focus on the company without distractions." He flinched like I'd struck him. "I said I didn't want to tie you down. There's a difference, Angela, a significant one. Not from where I was standing, or falling as it turned out." 3 weeks after that call, I continued, my voice steady despite the pain of remembering. I fainted in the library during finals week. The smell of old books, concerned faces hovering over me, the embarrassment of being wheeled out on a stretcher while everyone watched. It's all still vivid. I could see him leaning forward, every muscle tense with attention. The campus clinic ran tests. I thought it was exhaustion, maybe anemia from my stellar diet of ramen and coffee. The doctor came back with this careful expression, the kind they must teach in medical school for delivering life-changing news. "You're pregnant, Miss Steele, about 6 weeks along." My hand moved unconsciously to my stomach, a phantom echo of that first protective gesture. I could still feel that moment, my hand moving instinctively to protect something I hadn't known existed 5 minutes earlier. The echo of your voice in my head. "I can't ask you to wait. I need space. You deserve better than being tied to this life." I threw up, I admitted, the memory still sharp after 7 years. Right there in the exam room. The nurse thought it was morning sickness. It was pure panic. Cassian's face had gone pale. "Why didn't you tell me?" I tried. The words came out harder than intended, edged with all the frustration and hurt I'd buried. "God, Cassian, I tried everything. Your phone number was disconnected within a week. This number is no longer in service," the recording said over and over. "Very helpful when you're 22, pregnant and terrified." I remembered sitting in the library, my hand on my still flat stomach, listening to that automated message on repeat, each word driving home how thoroughly he'd disappeared from my life. I sent emails to every possible variation of your name at the company. Sucrow, Cassian C, Sucrow, Cassian Crow, everything I could think of. They all bounced back with automated responses about invalid addresses or security filters. The laptop screen had been full of returned message notifications, each one a small rejection, each one reinforcing the message that I didn't belong in his new world. Your social media became this sanitized corporate thing overnight. No message option, no personal posts, just press releases about acquisitions and charity galas and business strategy. You became unreachable in every way that mattered. Every platform, every avenue, closed. "But I wrote you a letter," I continued, my voice cracking slightly despite my efforts to stay composed. An actual, physical letter. 4 pages front and back. I poured everything into it. About the baby. About how scared I was. About how I still loved you despite everything. Despite the phone call and the silence. I found your adoptive family's estate address through public records and sent it certified mail. Someone signed for it. I have the receipt in a box somewhere. The color drained from his face completely. I never saw any letter. Angela, I swear to you, I never saw it. He pulled out his phone, typing rapidly with shaking fingers. The security breach. About 3 months after my biological father died, someone hacked our entire system trying to access corporate secrets and financial records. The security team went nuclear, changed everything. All my numbers, emails, even mail screening protocols. They were intercepting everything, filtering what reached me through multiple layers. He showed me his screen, though the technical details meant nothing to me, just graphs and security protocols and corporate jargon. Every contact method was completely overhauled. Even my personal mail went through security screening. If it looked personal and wasn't from a verified sender, if it mentioned pregnancy or money or relationships. He trailed off, the implications clear, horrifying. Your letter probably ended up in some security firm's filing system, classified as a potential threat or extortion attempt. They were protecting me from scammers and stalkers, and in the process, they protected you from me, I finished quietly. The irony was so bitter I almost laughed. He'd tried to protect me from his dangerous new world, and that same protective instinct had built walls that kept my truth from reaching him. When you didn't respond to the letter after 2 weeks, I looked you up online, I said, the memory still stinging. I was 8 months pregnant by then, ankles swollen, working double shifts to save money before the baby came. I couldn't afford to keep chasing ghosts. I could still see those society pages, still feel the way my heart had sunk. There you were at some tech summit, and then that charity gala in Manhattan. You had a woman on your arm in a silver dress that probably cost more than my annual rent. The caption called you the city's most eligible bachelor, building an empire while building a reputation for strategic philanthropy. I'd memorized those articles, tortured myself with each word, each photograph of him looking successful and happy and completely fine without me. The gossip sites speculated about your relationship with her, Victoria Hartwell, some venture capitalist's daughter. They said you were the perfect power couple, combining business acumen with old money connections. And there I was, throwing up in my mother's bathroom, trying to hide my pregnancy from her because I couldn't explain what had happened, working double shifts at the diner because my insurance barely covered prenatal care. I could have gone to your office, I admitted, the confession costing me. Could have walked into that glass tower downtown with my pregnant belly and demanded to see you, shown up at one of those charity galas, made a scene, forced you to acknowledge me. But can you imagine the headlines? Desperate ex tries to trap billionaire with baby. Gold digger claims Crow heir is father. Former girlfriend attempts extortion with pregnancy claim. They would have destroyed me in the press, and by extension, destroyed our child before she was even born. The tabloids would have made Amara's entire existence a scandal. You had resources I couldn't dream of, I continued, the old hurt bleeding through despite my best efforts. If you'd wanted to find me, really wanted to, you could have. You knew my mother's name, knew where I grew up, knew where I'd worked. One private investigator could have found me in a day, maybe an hour, when you didn't. I shrugged, the gesture encompassing years of conclusions and hurt. That was my answer. You'd moved on to your new life, your new world, your new level of society. We weren't part of it. So I made a choice, I said firmly. Use my energy trying to chase a ghost who didn't want to be found, or use it to survive and give our daughter the best life I could manage alone. Pride, practicality, self-preservation, call it whatever you want. I chose Amara. Every single time, I chose her. Cassian was quiet for a long moment, processing, his hands covering his face briefly. When he spoke, his voice was rough, with suppressed emotion, with grief for time lost. I told myself you'd realized what a mess I was, and walked away, he said finally. That you'd seen the headlines about the hostile takeover attempts, the family drama with relatives I'd never met coming out of nowhere demanding money, the security issues, the constant pressure. I convinced myself you'd decided you were better off without me. He laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness and regret. I thought respecting your silence was the only decent thing I could do. Maybe you'd found someone normal, someone who could give you the simple, happy life we'd planned before everything went to hell. Someone who worked a regular job and came home at reasonable hours and didn't need security teams. We each wrote our own story about what happened, I said quietly, the truth settling between us like dust. And we were both completely wrong. We filled the silence with assumptions, instead of fighting through the obstacles to communicate. The hospital room felt too small for the weight of 7 years of misunderstanding, of two people who'd loved each other making opposite choices based on incomplete information, on fear disguised as protection. Whatever we did to each other, Cassian said finally, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute resolution, whatever mistakes we made, whatever miscommunications destroyed us, Amara did nothing wrong. He met my eyes directly, and I saw the businessman he'd become, decisive, focused, unwavering in a way the 25-year-old boy hadn't been. She deserves the truth. She deserves to know her father. And I want to know my daughter Angela. I want to be part of her life, not as some stranger who swoops in with money and disrupts everything, but as her father. If you'll let me... Fear shot through me like electricity, sharp and immediate. My hand gripped the hospital blanket, knuckles white. The question escaped before I could stop it, raw and desperate, fueled by 7 years of protecting what was mine. Are you going to try to take her from me? His head snapped back as if I'd slapped him, genuine hurt flashing across his features before he could mask it. The monitors beeped steadily, marking the seconds of silence that felt like hours. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Take her from you? Cassian's voice cracked on the words, genuine pain replacing the controlled businessman facade. Angela, no. God, no. Never. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window before turning back, his hands running through his hair in a gesture I remembered, from when he was overwhelmed, when the pressure became too much. The silver at his temples caught the light. I know what people expect from families like mine, he said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Lawyers, custody battles, using money like a weapon to get what we want, using resources to steamroll over anyone in our way. But that's not who I am. It's never been who I am, and it's sure as hell not who my parents raised me to be. His grey eyes found mine, intense and unwavering. You're her mother. You've been everything to her for 7 years. You're her home, her safety, her whole world. You fed her and clothed her and kept her safe when I didn't even know she existed. I would never try to destroy that. I would never hurt her by taking away the one constant she's had her entire life. He moved closer to the bed, his voice dropping to something more intimate, more vulnerable. I just want to be part of it. Part of her life. Part of whatever you'll allow. Not as some stranger who swoops in with legal documents and court orders, but as her father. If you'll let me. On your terms. The sincerity in his voice made my chest ache with something complicated, relief mixed with old feelings I'd thought I'd buried. This was the Cassian I'd fallen in love with, not the billionaire. In the headlines, but the man who'd once spent 3 hours helping a freshman find her lost cat because she was crying in the library, who'd tutored struggling students for free, who'd believed that success meant nothing if you had to step on people to achieve it. There's something else, he said carefully, watching my reaction like he was approaching something explosive. My parents are here, downstairs in the family waiting area. The heart monitor betrayed my spike of panic, the beeping accelerating noticeably. Your parents? The words came out higher than I intended. I called them after I got Amara's call. I was on a plane trying to get here, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I needed them. When I told them about the possibility that I might have a daughter, that you were in the hospital, they got on their plane immediately. They were in London for a charity event. They left everything and flew back. Lydia and Elias Crow. The adoptive parents who'd taken in a brilliant 15-year-old foster kid with a chip on his shoulder and anger issues, who'd given him their name, their resources, their complicated but genuine love. The couple who'd intimidated me so thoroughly during our one formal meeting that I'd barely eaten anything, too nervous to use the wrong fork or say the wrong thing. "Angela, breathe," Cassian said gently, noticing my distress, moving closer to the bed. "They're not here with lawyers or court orders or demands. They're here as potentially new grandparents who just discovered they might have a granddaughter they've never met. They're here because they're scared and hopeful and want to help." My mind flew back to that dinner, 5 years into our relationship, in their Manhattan penthouse. I'd been 21, still in school, still believing that love could bridge any gap. The table had been set with more forks than I knew what to do with, crystal glasses that caught the light like diamonds, art on the walls that belonged in museums. Elias Crow had been exactly what I'd expected, tall, silver-haired even then, carrying himself with the unconscious authority of someone who'd never been denied anything important, whose words shaped markets and moved money. He'd asked about my studies with polite interest, but I'd felt his assessment in every glance, measuring whether I was good enough for his son, whether I had the strength to survive in their world. Lydia Crow had been harder to read. Elegant in understated navy, pearls at her throat that were probably worth more than my mother's house, she'd noticed my untouched salad and quietly asked if I'd prefer something else. "The cook can make anything you'd like, dear," she'd said gently. "This must all seem terribly formal. Cassian should have warned you we go overboard when we're nervous about making good impressions." I'd been too intimidated to admit she was right, that they made me nervous, that I felt like a child playing dress-up in my one good dress from a department store clearance rack, that every moment reminded me I didn't belong in their world of wealth and influence. "They've been asking about you for years," Cassian continued, pulling me back to the present. "Every Christmas, every birthday, every family dinner. Mom would get this look and ask if I'd heard from that lovely Angela from college. She knew I never got over you, even when I pretended I had, even when I dated other people and tried to move on. Cassian, I can't—" I gestured at myself. The hospital gown, the monitors, the reality of my exhausted, working-class existence laid bare. "I'm not prepared for this. I look like hell. I'm in a hospital bed, and they're them. Billionaires, philanthropists. People who probably have staff to handle uncomfortable situations. You don't need to be prepared. You just need to be yourself." The woman who raised an incredible daughter alone for 7 years while working multiple jobs and never giving up. That's all they need to see. That's all that matters. The knock was soft, tentative, not at all what I'd expected from people who could buy their way through any door, who probably had assistants to knock for them. Cassian moved to open it, and they entered like they were approaching something fragile and precious, careful not to startle or overwhelm. Lydia Crow looked older but no less elegant, her silver hair pulled back in a simple style, wearing slacks and a cashmere sweater instead of the formal wear from my memory. She looked like someone's actual grandmother, not a billionaire's wife. Elias followed, still tall and imposing at 68, but there was something different in his expression, uncertainty, perhaps even vulnerability, emotions I'd never associated with him. "Angela," Lydia said softly, "not Miss Steele or any formal address that would create distance. Just my name, gentle and warm. Thank you for seeing us. I know this must be overwhelming." "Mrs. Crow," I started, my voice shakier than I wanted. "Lydia, please." She moved closer, her hands clasped in front of her in a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "We're long past formalities, don't you think? If what Cassian has told us is true, if we have a granddaughter, then we're family. Or we'd like to be." Elias stepped forward, extending his hand carefully, respectfully, waiting for me to take it rather than assuming. "Elias," he said simply, "not Mr. Crow. Just Elias. How are you feeling? Cassian said you gave everyone quite a scare. The genuine concern in his voice threw me off balance. This wasn't the intimidating patriarch from that long-ago dinner, the man who'd made me feel like I was being interviewed for a position I wasn't qualified for. This was a man who looked hopeful and worried and remarkably human. I'm okay, I managed. Stable. They're keeping me for observation. Cassian told us, Lydia said, sinking into the visitor's chair like her legs couldn't quite hold her steady. She looked at her son, then back to me. About the phone call. About your daughter calling for help. About Amara. Her voice broke slightly on the name, and she pressed her fingers to her lips as if to hold in the emotion threatening to spill over. We don't want to overwhelm you, Elias added quickly, standing behind his wife's chair, one hand on her shoulder in a gesture of support and comfort. We understand this is complicated. 7 years is a long time. He paused, choosing words carefully. We needed to be here, to see you, to understand what happened and how we can help now. Her name is Amara, I said quietly, watching their reactions carefully, protective instincts warring with the reality that they had a right to know. Amara Rose Steele. She's 7. She's brilliant, too smart for her own good sometimes. She organizes everything by color and size without being taught. She draws blueprints instead of stick figures. She asks questions I don't know how to answer about physics and architecture and why the sky is blue. Lydia made a small sound, reaching for Elias's hand. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Like Cassian at that age, she whispered. He used to categorize his toys by function and potential energy output. Drove his foster family crazy before he came to us. She gets cold easily, I continued, the details spilling out now. 7 years of solo parenting, wanting someone else to know these things, to share the burden of remembering. She's allergic to tree nuts. She has a small birthmark on her left shoulder blade. She's afraid of thunderstorms but loves the rain. She can read 3 grades above her level but still sleeps with a nightlight. We owe you an apology, Elias said suddenly, his voice formal but sincere, carrying the weight of genuine regret. After Cassian's biological father died and left him everything, we pushed too hard. We thought we were preparing him for the responsibility, teaching him to handle wealth and power and corporate politics. But we nearly crushed him under the weight of our expectations. We assumed he knew, Lydia added, tears threatening her composed exterior now, her voice thick with emotion. Under all the pressure and demands, he knew we loved him, that we were proud of him, not because of the company or the money, but because of who he was. But we never said it enough. We were so focused on making him ready for his inheritance that we forgot he was barely 25, grieving a father he'd never known, and terrified of failing. She looked directly at me, and I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. When he broke things off with you, when he told us you'd parted ways, we thought it was his choice, a business decision. He said you wanted different things, that it was mutual. We didn't realize he was trying to protect you from the chaos we'd helped create, from the pressure and danger and constant scrutiny. You were a scared young woman, Lydia continued, her voice gentle but firm, making an impossible decision with very little support and no resources. You did what you thought was best for your child with the information you had. No mother could fault you for that. I certainly don't. The words, so different from what I'd expected, from the judgment and accusations I'd prepared myself for, made my throat tight. I can't fight you in court, I blurted out, the fear I'd been holding back finally breaking free. I don't have money for lawyers. I've been working 2, sometimes 3 jobs just to keep us housed and fed. If you decide to take her, to prove I'm an unfit mother because I collapsed from exhaustion, because I can't provide what you can, because she lives above a laundromat instead of in a penthouse, stop. Lydia's voice was firm but kind. She reached across the space between us, her manicured hand covering my work-roughened one. Her skin was soft, probably from expensive creams and spa treatments, while mine was dry and calloused from manual labor. But her grip was warm, genuine. "We're not here to take her from you. We would never do that to you or to her. You're her mother," Elias said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to making pronouncements that people listened to, but using it now for reassurance rather than intimidation. "You've raised her, loved her, sacrificed for her in ways we can only imagine. We're not here as threats. We're here as grandparents, if you'll have us. If you'll allow us the privilege of knowing her, of being part of her life in whatever capacity you're comfortable with." "We've already missed 7 years," Lydia added softly, her thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of my hand. "First steps, first words, first days of school, lost teeth, skinned knees, bedtime stories. We don't want to miss any more, but only on your terms, only in ways that make you feel safe and supported, not threatened or pressured." I looked between them, these people I'd built up as monsters in my mind during 7 years of hiding, who were sitting here offering not demands but requests, not threats but hope, not judgment but understanding. My throat felt tight with unexpected emotion. "She's downstairs," I heard myself say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Amara. With my mother. They went to the cafeteria, but they should be back any minute." Lydia's hand flew to her mouth, a small gasp escaping. Elias gripped the back of his wife's chair, his knuckles white with the force of his emotion. Even Cassian seemed to stop breathing for a moment, his entire body tensing. "If you want to meet her," I continued, the words coming faster now, the decision made even though I wasn't sure if it was the right one. "I haven't told her about Cassian yet. She doesn't know he's her father. But if you want to meet her just as family friends for now, as people who knew me in college." "We'd be honored," Elias said, his voice thick with emotion I'd never expected from the composed businessman, the patriarch who commanded boardrooms and shaped markets. "Absolutely honored. Thank you, Angela. Thank you for giving us this chance." Lydia was crying now, silent tears sliding down her cheeks, her composure completely abandoned. "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "Thank you for trusting us with this. We won't let you down. We won't let her down." The room fell silent except for the steady beep of monitors and the distant sound of elevator doors opening down the hall. My mother's voice carried faintly through the door. She was telling Amara something about being quiet in hospitals, about not running in hallways. Footsteps approached, small sneakers squeaking against linoleum alongside my mother's slower, more measured tread. In seconds, my daughter would walk through that door and meet the family she never knew existed, the grandparents who'd just learned of her existence hours ago, the father who'd been a ghost, a question I'd never answered, a blank space on every form that was asked. Cassian moved to stand beside his parents, 3 generations of crows about to converge with my small, fierce daughter who had no idea her world was about to expand in ways she couldn't comprehend. His hand found mine briefly, squeezing gently, a question and a promise all at once, asking if I was ready and promising he'd follow my lead. The door handle turned with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in the charged silence. The door opened, and my mother entered first, holding it wide for Amara, who balanced a small cardboard carrier with 2 pudding cups like they were precious cargo requiring her full concentration. "Mummy, I brought you pudding," Amara announced proudly, her earlier distress replaced by the simple joy of completing her mission successfully. "The cafeteria lady said chocolate is better for your heart, but vanilla is better for your stomach. So I got both, and you can pick which one you need most." She stopped mid-step, suddenly noticing the room had more people than when she'd left. Her grey eyes swept over the unexpected guests with the careful assessment of a child who'd learned early to read rooms and gauge adult moods. "Are you more doctors?" she asked, tilting her head at Lydia and Elias in that gesture that was pure Cassian. Mommy already has one doctor, Dr. Harding. She has a tablet with pictures of hearts on it. Lydia smiled softly, staying seated to appear less imposing. A grandmother's instinct I wouldn't have expected from someone so elegant and polished. She extended her hand to Amara at the child's level, not forcing contact but offering it. Not doctors, sweetheart. We're friends of your mom's. She paused, glancing at Cassian before adding carefully, weighing each word. Friends of your mom and dad. The word hung in the air like a held breath, like a secret finally spoken aloud. Amara's forehead crinkled in confusion, the pudding cups forgotten in her small hands. My mom and who? The silence that followed felt infinite, stretching across 7 years of secrets and careful omissions. Every adult in the room seemed frozen, waiting for someone else to take the lead, to be the one to change everything. My mother quietly took the pudding carrier from Amara's hands, setting it on the bedside table with deliberate care. Cassian and I exchanged a look, years of unspoken words condensed into a single moment of understanding, of shared fear and shared hope. It was time. There was no more hiding, no more protecting her from a truth that would shape the rest of her life. He moved slowly, deliberately, lowering himself to kneel on the hospital floor so he was eye level with Amara. The expensive suit pants would probably be ruined by the hospital floor, but he didn't seem to notice or care about the cost or the cleaning bills. Amara, he said gently, his voice steady despite the emotion I could see swimming in his eyes, despite his hands trembling slightly. Do you remember the phone call, when your mom fell down and you called for help? She nodded solemnly, her expression becoming serious. The phone called you instead of Grandma Rosa. You talked to me until the loud truck people came. You told me to be brave. That's right, I did. And do you know why the phone had my number saved in it? Another small nod. Mummy said you were friends from college, from before I was born. We were, Cassian confirmed, choosing his words with visible care. Very good friends. Best friends, actually. But Amara, sometimes adults make mistakes. Sometimes we get scared or confused, and we make choices that keep us apart from people we love. We think we're doing the right thing, protecting people, but sometimes we're just protecting ourselves from being hurt. He paused, visibly gathering courage, and I saw his hands clench briefly before he forced them to relax. I'm not just your mom's friend from college, sweetheart. I'm your dad. If you'll have me, you're my dad? Amara repeated the words slowly, like she was tasting something foreign, testing how it felt in her mouth. My actual dad. She turned to me, those grey eyes seeking confirmation, seeking truth from the one person she trusted completely and absolutely. I nodded, tears sliding freely down my cheeks now, no longer trying to hold them back. Yes, baby. Cassian is your father. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I thought I was protecting you, keeping you safe, but I should have told you the truth a long time ago. I made mistakes because I was scared. Amara stood very still, processing this information with the serious concentration she usually reserved for her most complex drawings, for blueprints that required careful planning. I thought my dad was just gone, like in some of the books at school, where the dad goes away and doesn't come back because he doesn't want to. The words hit Cassian like a physical blow. I watched pain flash across his face, raw and unguarded. I didn't know about you, Cassian said quickly, urgently, his voice rough with emotion. If I had known, nothing could have kept me away. Nothing in this world. Not money, not distance, not fear. Nothing. I would have been there from the very first day. Why didn't you know? The question was simple, direct, the kind only a child could ask, without the complications adults attach to everything. The simple question cut straight to the heart of 7 years of miscommunication, of assumptions and silence and fear disguised as protection. Cassian looked at me, asking silent permission. I nodded, giving him the space to answer honestly. "Because your mom and I had a big misunderstanding," he said carefully, truthfully. "A really big one. We both thought the other person didn't want us anymore. We were wrong, but by the time we figured that out, a lot of time had passed. It took your brave phone call yesterday to bring us back together, to give us a chance to fix our mistakes." "So I called the right person?" Amara asked, her voice small and hopeful. "Didn't the phone make a mistake?" "You called exactly the right person," Cassian said firmly. "You saved your mom's life, and you gave me the greatest gift I could ever receive, the chance to know you." Amara studied him with an intensity that would have been comical if the moment wasn't so charged with possibility and change. Then, with the practical priorities of a 7-year-old cutting through all the emotional complexity, she began her interrogation. "Do you like mac and cheese?" Despite everything, despite the weight of the moment, Cassian's mouth quivered with a small smile. "I love mac and cheese, especially the kind with the powder that turns bright orange." "That's the best kind," Amara agreed seriously. "Do you know about dinosaurs?" "I know some things. T-Rex had arms too short to do push-ups." That earned him a tiny giggle, the first break in her serious demeanor. "That's silly. Do you know how to braid hair?" He glanced at her slightly fuzzy braids, courtesy of my mother's morning efforts and an active day of hospital waiting. "I don't, but I'm very good at learning new things. It's kind of my job to learn and figure things out. Would you teach me?" She considered this carefully. "Maybe. You have to practice a lot. Grandma Rosa says it takes patience. Can you ride a bike?" "Yes. Can you kill spiders?" "I can, but I prefer to catch them and put them outside because they're just small creatures trying to live their lives." "That's what Mummy does," Amara exclaimed, clearly pleased by this compatibility, this evidence that they shared something beyond genetics. "She says spiders eat the bad bugs, so we should be nice to them." "Do you have a house?" "I do. Does it have stairs?" "Yes. Several floors of them." "Good. I like stairs. Our apartment doesn't have stairs inside, just outside, and they're metal and they make noise and sometimes they smell funny when it rains." The casual mention of our living conditions, the details she didn't know were differences that mattered in the adult world, hung in the air. But Cassian's expression didn't change, didn't show judgment or pity, just acceptance. She fell silent again, processing all this new information with the gravity of a judge considering a verdict that would change lives. The room waited. 5 adults hanging on the decision of one small girl who had no idea the power she held in this moment. Finally she looked back at Cassian, still kneeling patiently at her level, his expensive suit forgotten, his important meetings and business empire irrelevant, and made her pronouncement. "Okay, you can be my dad." The simple acceptance broke something in Cassian. His composure cracked completely, and he pulled Amara into a careful hug, mindful not to startle her or squeeze too hard, treating her like the precious, fragile gift she was. She stood stiff for a moment, uncertain of this new physical affection from someone who'd been a stranger minutes ago, then slowly, tentatively, patted his shoulder in an awkward but genuine gesture of comfort. "Are you crying?" she asked, pulling back to study his face with concern and curiosity. "Happy tears," he managed, his voice thick. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're really, really happy, when something wonderful happens that they'd stopped hoping for. Oh, she processed this information. Mommy had happy tears when I learned to read, and when I made her a birthday card. Exactly like that. Behind him, Lydia had given up all pretense of composure, tears streaming openly down her face, her hand pressed to her mouth. Elias cleared his throat roughly, touching the corner of his eye and muttering something about hospital air being dry and irritating, about needing to adjust the ventilation. "Amara," Cassian said, still kneeling but gesturing to his parents with visible pride. "These are my parents. That makes them your grandparents. If that's okay with you." Amara's eyes widened with genuine surprise and delight. "More grandparents? I only had Grandma Rosa before. Now I have 3, if that's okay with you," Lydia said softly. Her voice warmed despite the tears. "We'd very much like to be your grandparents, to know you and spend time with you and be part of your life." Amara studied them with the same careful assessment she'd given Cassian, weighing and measuring in whatever way children do these things. "Do you have candy in your purse? Grandmas in cartoons always have candy in their purses." Despite her tears, Lydia laughed, a warm, genuine sound that filled the sterile hospital room with something like joy. As a matter of fact, she reached into her handbag and produced a small wrapped chocolate, looking to me for permission before offering it. I nodded, too emotionally exhausted to worry about sugar or spoiled dinner. "I like you," Amara declared, unwrapping the chocolate with reverent care, treating it like treasure. "What should I call you? Whatever feels comfortable to you," Elias said gently. His usual commanding presence softened completely. "Grandma and Grandpa, or Lydia and Elias, or anything else you'd like." "Grandma Lydia and Grandpa Elias," Amara decided immediately, with the quick certainty of children who see solutions adults overcomplicate. So nobody gets confused with Grandma Rosa. 3 grandmas would be too many, but 2 is good. "Your dad used to love chocolate too," Lydia told Amara, who had carefully broken the piece in half to share with me, climbing onto the bed with the natural assumption that this was where she belonged. "When he was your age, he once tried to build a machine that would sort his Halloween candy by how much chocolate was in each piece." "What's that mean?" Amara asked, settling against my side. "How much chocolate is in the chocolate?" Cassian explained, standing finally, his knees probably protesting from kneeling on the hard floor. "Some chocolate has more chocolate than other chocolate. It's complicated." "That's confusing," Amara decided with a child's direct logic. "Did the machine work?" "No," Elias chimed in, his usual reserved demeanor softening into something grandfatherly and warm. "It sorted everything into one pile labeled mine, and another pile also labeled mine." Amara giggled, a real laugh this time, the sound bright and unguarded. I felt my mother relax slightly from her position by the door, where Rosa Steele had been watching the crows like a protective hawk, ready to intervene if they overstepped or hurt her granddaughter. But seeing them interact with Amara, seeing them be grandparents, not billionaires, had shifted something in her expression from suspicion to cautious approval. "I like to build things too," Amara told them proudly, sitting up straighter. "I draw houses. Mommy says I'm an architect in training, whatever that means. May we see them sometime?" Lydia asked hopefully, leaning forward with genuine interest. "They're at home. In my special folder, organized by color because that makes sense. Red houses in one section, blue houses in another. She's definitely related to you," Elias murmured to Cassian, loud enough for everyone to hear with something like pride in his voice. I watched this scene unfold, my daughter chattering happily about her drawings, showing Lydia Elias the proper way to eat pudding with detailed instructions about technique. Cassian standing close enough that his hand occasionally brushed mine on the bed rail. My mother slowly warming to these strangers who were suddenly family through the simple acceptance of a 7-year-old. Cassian's eyes met mine over Amara's head as she demonstrated her pudding technique to his parents with the seriousness of a teacher. The look he gave me was pure wonder mixed with something else, something that reminded me of late nights in our tiny apartment, of dreams we'd shared before the world got complicated, of love that apparently could survive 7 years of silence and misunderstanding and fear. His fingers found mine, a tentative touch that sent electricity through my exhausted body, that made my heart rate spike on the monitor in a way that had nothing to do with cardiac episodes. For a moment, we were 22 again, Before the money, before the separation, before the secrets. Just Angela and Cassian against the world, believing that love was enough to overcome anything. I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified that this felt right. Like pieces of a puzzle I'd convinced myself didn't fit, were suddenly clicking into place with an audible snap. My daughter had a father who looked at her like she'd hung the moon. Grandparents who seemed genuinely delighted by her existence. A family that extended beyond our tiny apartment above the laundromat, beyond the small world I'd carefully constructed to keep us safe. But with that family came a world I'd run from. Wealth that could swallow us whole, expectations I couldn't meet, a life that moved in circles so far above mine that I needed oxygen just to glimpse them, cameras and scrutiny and danger I'd spent 7 years avoiding. Amara yawned, the excitement finally catching up with her small body. She curled into my side, still clutching her chocolate wrapper like treasure, completely unaware that her life had just changed irrevocably, that nothing would ever be the same. "Can Dad come home with us?" she asked sleepily, the new title rolling off her tongue like she'd been saying it forever, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The question hung in the air, and I realized that everything, absolutely everything, was about to change. Dr. Harding returned the next morning with a tablet full of test results and a treatment plan that made my chest tight for entirely different reasons than my heart condition. "The good news is your heart showed no permanent damage," she began, pulling up a chair beside my bed. Amara had gone home with my mother the night before after much persuasion and promises that I'd be home soon, leaving me alone to face the medical reality without filtering it through a 7-year-old's understanding. "The bad news is you're a ticking time bomb if you continue living the way you have been." She showed me charts and numbers that meant little to me beyond their clear implication. My body was staging a full rebellion against the life I'd forced it to sustain. "Stress management isn't optional anymore, Miss Steele. It's literally life or death. You'll need beta blockers to regulate your heart rhythm, regular cardiology appointments every month for at least 6 months, and significant lifestyle modifications." She paused, her expression sympathetic but firm. "That means fewer work hours, better work hours," I said flatly, instead of reality crushing, surviving. "I have rent and reduced stress levels, childcare costs, groceries. You can't afford not to." She interrupted gently but firmly. "Because next time, and there will be a next time if you don't change course, Amara might not be able to call for help in time. Think about what that would mean for her. Think about her finding you." The words hit like a physical blow, like a fist to the chest. My daughter found me dead on the kitchen floor. My daughter, alone, terrified, shaking my body and getting no response. My daughter entering the foster system or burdening my aging mother. The nightmare I'd worked myself to death trying to prevent would be caused by exactly that, working myself to death. A knock interrupted before I could spiral further into panic. Cassian entered, 2 cups of coffee in hand, looking like he'd actually slept in the hospital waiting room based on the slight wrinkles in yesterday's expensive shirt and the shadow of stubble on his jaw. "I spoke with Dr. Harding's office this morning," he said without preamble, setting 1 coffee on my bedside table, "about treatment plans and follow-up care. I've arranged to cover all medical expenses related to your cardiac care, including medications, appointments, and any emergency visits." Dr. Harding glanced between us, clearly sensing the tension crackling in the air, and diplomatically excused herself. "I'll give you some privacy to discuss the logistics. I'll be back this evening to finalize discharge instructions." The moment the door closed, I turned on him, exhaustion making me sharper than I intended. "You can't just arrange things without asking me first. This is my life, my medical care. I can when your life is at stake, and pride is the only thing standing in the way of proper treatment." His voice was calm but inflexible, carrying the authority of someone used to making decisions that stuck. "This isn't negotiable, Angela. I don't want to be your charity case." The words came out sharper than intended, fueled by 8 years of hard-won independence, of proving I could survive without help. I've managed on my own for 7 years. I don't need to be rescued like some damsel in distress. "You collapsed on your kitchen floor," he interrupted, his composure cracking, real emotion bleeding through. "You nearly died because you were working yourself into the ground to avoid asking for help from anyone. That's not strength, Angela. That's just suffering alone when you don't have to anymore. Easy for you to say when you can write a check and make problems disappear like magic." "It's not charity," he said firmly, moving closer, his voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "It's my responsibility. It's being a father. And frankly, it's the one part of this entire mess I can actually fix. I can't go back 7 years and be there when you need me. I can't change the fact that you carried and raised our daughter alone while I was building empires and attending galas. But I can damn well make sure you don't die from stress because you're too proud to accept help now." The rawness in his voice stopped my next argument before it could form. He wasn't trying to control me. He was terrified of losing me again, this time permanently. "Boundaries," I said finally, forcing myself to think practically instead of emotionally. "If we're doing this, we need clear boundaries." He nodded immediately, relief washing over his features. "Whatever you need, name them. You can help with Amara's expenses, school supplies, clothes, activities she couldn't have before, medical bills, mine and hers. But I'm not moving into some penthouse you buy, and I'm not becoming financially dependent on you for every little thing. I need to maintain my own life, my own independence, my own sense of self." "Agreed," he said without hesitation. "I'm not trying to take over your life, Angela. I just want to be in it, both of your lives. As a partner in parenting, not a savior swooping in to fix everything." The word partner hung between us, loaded with implications neither of us was ready to examine fully. Outside in the hallway, a different negotiation was taking place between two women who'd lived very different lives but shared a common goal. My mother stood with her arms crossed, watching Lydia Crow with the wariness of someone who'd seen wealthy people promise help before, only to attach strings that were strangled. But Lydia didn't back down from the scrutiny, didn't hide behind politeness or money. "You're wondering if we're going to try to take her," Lydia said quietly, cutting straight to the heart of Rosa's fear with uncomfortable directness. "The thought crossed my mind," my mother admitted bluntly. "Your family has resources Angela can't compete with. Courts tend to favor wealth and stability, even when they shouldn't." "I've seen it happen. You're absolutely right. The system is biased toward people like us, and we benefit from that bias every day whether we want to or not." Lydia's honesty seemed to surprise Rosa. "But we're not interested in using that advantage against Angela or her daughter. We just learned we have a granddaughter. We want to know her, love her, be part of her life, not replace the grandmother she already has and loves." Rosa studied her for a long moment, measuring sincerity against experience. Angela raised that girl alone, worked herself literally sick keeping them afloat. She's a good mother, better than good. Amara is happy, healthy, smart and kind. That's all Angela's doing. I can see that. Amara is curious, confident, kind, articulate. All things that come from being loved well and consistently. Lydia's voice softened with genuine emotion. "I'm not here to judge Angela's choices or swoop in like some kind of rescue operation. I just want what you want, for Amara to be happy, healthy, safe, and loved." "And what about my daughter?" Rosa pressed, her protective instincts fully engaged. "What happens when your son gets bored of playing dad? When the novelty wears off and he remembers he has a billion-dollar company to run?" "Cassian doesn't do anything by halves," Lydia said with absolute certainty, with the conviction of someone who'd raised him and knew him completely. "When he commits completely, sometimes to his own detriment. If he says he wants to be Amara's father, he means it for life, not just until it's inconvenient or difficult. The two grandmothers stood in silence, each protecting their own, Rosa her daughter and granddaughter, Lydia her son and newfound granddaughter. Finally, Rosa nodded slowly, not quite accepting but willingness to observe. "We'll see," she said, "but I'm watching. If anyone hurts either of them, I'd expect nothing less," Lydia replied with a small smile. "I'd do exactly the same in your position. Probably worse." Back in my room, Cassian had pulled up his phone calendar, approaching fatherhood the way he probably approached business acquisitions, with careful planning and structured implementation. "I'm thinking we start slow," he said, showing me a tentative schedule with color-coded blocks. "Short visits at first, always with you present if that makes you more comfortable. Let Amara get used to having me around before we do anything like overnight stays or major changes to her routine." "Thank you," I interrupted, genuinely surprised by his restraint. "I was worried you'd want to jump straight into shared custody agreements or formal arrangements. Angela, I'm a stranger to her. A stranger who happens to share her DNA but still a stranger in every way that matters. I'm not going to traumatize our daughter by ripping her away from the only parent she's ever known, from the only life she understands." He set the phone down, meeting my eyes directly. "We build trust first, relationships first. Everything else follows naturally." "What about school?" I asked, voicing one of my many concerns. "Amara goes to the public elementary 3 blocks from our apartment. It's not prestigious or private or—" "Is she happy there?" "She loves her teacher, Mrs. Patterson. Has friends she's known since kindergarten. Knows the routine, feels safe and confident." "Then we don't change it," he said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Not unless she wants to, and not without discussing it with you first. Stability and happiness matter infinitely more than prestige or reputation." We talked through logistics for over an hour, how he'd introduce himself to Amara's world, when he might join us for dinner, how to handle inevitable questions from other parents at school pickup, and whether to tell her teacher about the changed family situation. Every time I expected him to push for more access, faster integration, he instead deferred to my judgment as the parent who'd been there all along. Put yourself in Angela's shoes for a second. Would you trust your billionaire ex to suddenly co-parent after 7 years, or would you keep your guard up like she did? If you've ever had to co-parent or blend families, drop your experience in the comments. And if you're still here with me in this story, hit that like button so we can keep bringing you real complicated stories like this. They discharged me 2 days later with a pharmacy bag full of medications and instructions that basically amounted to stop living like you have been or die. "Young." Cassian appeared in the doorway as the nurse helped me into a wheelchair, hospital policy despite my protests that I could walk perfectly fine. "I've got it," he told the nurse gently, moving to push the chair himself. Then, catching my expression, he paused mid-movement. "If that's okay with you." The fact that he asked, that he checked instead of assuming control, made me nod. Small gesture, but it mattered more than he probably knew. My mother had brought Amara to pick me up, and the moment my daughter saw me in the wheelchair, her face crumpled with worry that made my heart ache. "You're okay, baby," I reassured her quickly, reaching for her hand. "Just hospital rules. I'm all better now. Promise?" She clutched the stuffed bear the EMT had given her during the emergency, which had become her constant companion over the past 2 days. "Promise. I'm going to take my medicine and rest and not work so hard for a while." Cassian crouched down beside the wheelchair, bringing himself to Amara's level in the way he'd already made habitual. "Your mom is going to be just fine, but she needs to rest and take her medicine and not worry so much about everything, which means people who love her need to help more." "I can help," Amara declared, with the serious determination of a child wanting to prove herself capable. I can make my own breakfast. Cereal doesn't need cooking. And I can put my dishes in the sink. That's very grown-up and helpful of you, he said warmly, with genuine pride in his voice. Then, with a glance at me for permission that I appreciated, he added, and maybe I can help too, if that's okay with your mom. Amara looked between us, reading the tension and possibility with a child's perceptiveness, then made a decision with the easy logic of childhood, unencumbered by adult complications. She reached out one small hand to me and one to Cassian, bridging the gap between us physically. We can all help each other. That's what families do. My mother, standing behind them with the car keys, had tears in her eyes. Rosa Steele, who'd watched me struggle alone for 7 years, who'd helped when I left her but respected my fierce independence, was seeing her granddaughter hold hands with both parents for the first time. The image hit me hard. Amara's small form bridging the gap between us, literally connecting the two halves of her world with her small hands. Cassian's expression was somewhere between awe and overwhelm, like he couldn't quite believe this was real, that he was allowed to be part of this moment. We made our way to the parking lot, an odd little procession. Cassian carried my discharge papers and the bag of belongings my mother had brought, my phone charger, a change of clothes, the bills I'd been reviewing when I collapsed. Rosa led the way to her sedan, which suddenly looked even more worn next to the black luxury car idling nearby. Undoubtedly Cassian's ride, complete with driver waiting patiently. "Can Dad come to our house?" Amara asked as Rosa unlocked the car doors. The title still sounded strange from her lips, but increasingly natural, like she was trying it on and finding it fit. I looked at Cassian, who carefully kept his expression neutral, leaving the decision entirely to me without pressure or expectation. "Not today, baby. I need to rest and we need to let things happen slowly, okay? But we'll plan a special day soon where Dad can spend time with you. Just the two of you. That special day was scheduled for Saturday, 3 days away. We'd agreed on it before discharge. Cassian would take Amara to the park near our apartment for 2 hours. Public space, limited time, my mother on standby if needed. As the day approached, I found myself oscillating between relief that he was stepping up and terror at what it meant to share her with someone else. Amara, meanwhile, had been talking. About nothing else, planning what games they'd play, what she'd show him, whether parks had fancy snacks, or just regular ones like the vending machines at school. Saturday morning arrived too quickly. Amara wore her favorite purple dress and had insisted on bringing her blueprint folder to show Cassian her latest designs. She bounced by the window, watching for his car with barely contained excitement. "There!" she squealed as the black sedan pulled up outside our building, recognizing it from the hospital. I walked her downstairs, my heart hammering against my ribs in a way that had nothing to do with my cardiac condition and everything to do with watching my carefully controlled world expand beyond my ability to protect her from everything. Cassian stood beside his car, dressed down in jeans and a sweater that probably still cost more than my monthly grocery budget, but at least didn't scream billionaire. He looked nervous, I realized. Actually nervous about spending 2 hours with a 7-year-old. 2 hours, I told him, my hand on Amara's shoulder protectively. Her emergency inhaler is in her backpack even though she rarely needs it. She's allergic to tree nuts. I wrote it down along with my number and my mom's number. She gets cold easily, so I packed her jacket, even though it seems warm now. If anything feels wrong or she seems uncomfortable or scared, "I'll bring her right home," he promised, his voice steady and reassuring. "Angela, I've got this. We'll be fine." But as I watched Amara slip her small hand into his large one, chattering already about the swings and the slides and whether he could push her high enough to touch the sky, something in my chest cracked open. Letting my daughter walk away, holding his hand, felt like tearing my heart in two, again. Like losing control of the one thing I'd managed to control for 7 years. But this time, instead of losing him to silence and misunderstanding, I was choosing to let him in, choosing to trust him with the most precious thing in my world. The difference should have made it easier. It didn't. I stood on the sidewalk long after the car disappeared around the corner, my arms wrapped around myself against a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature, wondering if I'd just made the best decision of my life or a mistake I'd spend years trying to undo. Cassian had researched playgrounds the way most people research stock investments. He'd found reviews, safety ratings, accessibility features, nearby facilities. Everything except how to actually be a dad at one. Standing beside the swing set, he pushed Amara with careful, measured strokes, clearly calculating the physics of arc and momentum rather than just pushing naturally. "Higher," Amara squealed, her purple dress billowing around her legs. "Is this safe?" he asked, probably for the 5th time in as many minutes. "Dad, I'm not going to fly away," she laughed, and the sound of her calling him Dad so naturally still made his chest constrict with emotion he didn't know how to process. He'd almost brought a catered picnic. Harper had actually placed the order before he'd caught himself and cancelled it. Instead, he'd stopped at a regular deli and bought sandwiches wrapped in paper, juice boxes with bendy straws, and chips that came in a crinkly bag. Normal dad things that didn't require a staff or reservations or connections. "Want to see my blueprints?" Amara asked after the swings, leading him to a bench with the confidence of a tour guide. She spread out her drawings with the pride of an architect presenting to an important client. Houses with impossible geometries, buildings that defied gravity, all rendered in careful crayon with color-coded legends explaining her design choices. "This one has 17 bedrooms," she explained, pointing to a purple mansion with her small finger. "So nobody ever has to share if they don't want to. And this one has a library that goes up 4 floors with a slide to get down fast when you need a specific book in a hurry." Cassian studied each drawing like they were actual architectural proposals worth millions, asking questions about structural support and window placement that made her glow with importance while being taken seriously. He didn't mention that he could actually build these if she wanted. Not yet. Today was about being present, not about what money could buy. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, I wore a path in the already thin carpet. My phone sat on the counter, taunting me with its silence. I'd checked it 7 times in 30 minutes. No messages, which meant everything was fine, which somehow made me more anxious instead of less. What if she fell and hit her head? What if he didn't know when she got tired and needed a break? What if she asked about why he wasn't there before and he didn't have an answer that made sense to a 7-year-old mind? What if someone recognized him and took photos and our quiet life became a media spectacle? My mother, sitting at the kitchen table with her crossword puzzle, finally looked up with exasperation. "Angela Rosa Steele, sit down before you wear a hole clear through to the laundromat downstairs. I should have sent more snacks." What if she gets hungry and the deli sandwich isn't enough? Then he'll feed her. He's not an idiot, Mija. He built a billion-dollar company. I think he can handle lunch. She set down her pencil. Give him a chance. Give yourself a chance to trust someone. They returned exactly on time. Another thing I'd been obsessively watching on the clock. The buzzer sounded and I practically ran to the door, trying to look casual and failing completely when I opened it. Amara burst in like a small hurricane of joy and excitement. "Mommy!" We went on the swings and the slide, and Dad bought me a sandwich that was bigger than my head. And there were ducks, real ducks with babies. And he didn't know you're supposed to bring bread, so we just looked at them, but that was okay because one duck had babies and they were so fluffy and cute. She barely took a breath between sentences, already pulling me toward her room to show me a smooth rock she'd found that looked like a tiny egg, maybe a dinosaur egg from millions of years ago. Cassian stood in the doorway, looking simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. His expensive jeans had grass stains at the knees. His hair was windblown and messy. He looked more real than I had seen him since he'd walked back into my life. "She had a good time," I said, understating the obvious. "So did I." He pulled out his phone, hesitating before continuing. "I took some photos. I thought maybe we could look at them together. I don't want to experience moments with her that shut you out, even the ones I get to have separately. I want you to be part of seeing them, part of everything." The gesture was so thoughtful it made my throat tight with emotion. He scrolled through images of Amara mid-swing with her hair flying, Amara presenting her blueprints with professional seriousness. Amara crouched by the pond, studying ducks with scientific intensity. "She's incredible," he said softly, wondering in his voice. "I know. You did that. You made her into this confident, curious, kind person who asks questions and cares about spiders and shares her chocolate." "We made her," I corrected quietly. "Biology counts too. She has your eyes, your mind, your way of seeing the world." 3 weeks and 4 park visits later, Lydia called with an invitation that made my stomach drop with anxiety. "Just family dinner," she'd said warmly through the phone. "Nothing formal. We'd love to have you and Amara at the house. Rosa too, of course. Please say yes." The house was a penthouse overlooking the city. I had seen it in background shots of news articles about Cassian. 2,300 square feet of terrifying elegance and wealth. The night of the dinner, I changed outfits 4 times before my mother finally intervened. "You're not going to a job interview. You're going to eat food with people who already like you. Wear the blue dress and stop overthinking everything." Amara, meanwhile, had no such anxiety. She wore her purple dress again, apparently her meeting important people uniform, and brought her latest blueprint to show her grandparents. The penthouse was exactly as intimidating as I'd feared, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the entire city, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than my car was worth, art on the walls that looked museum quality because it probably was. But then Lydia opened the door in slacks and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back casually, looking more like someone's actual grandmother than a billionaire's wife. "Thank God you're here," she said, ushering us in with genuine relief. "I've been cooking and I have no idea if I've made enough food or enough to feed a small army. Angela, would you mind helping me in the kitchen? I could use another set of hands and some honest opinions." The kitchen was massive but currently chaotic in a way that felt almost normal. Pots on the stove, cutting boards covered with vegetables, the warm smell of garlic and herbs filling the air. Lydia handed me an apron without ceremony. I'm attempting my mother's recipe for chicken in wine sauce, but I think I've forgotten a step. "Do you cook much?" "Mostly boxed mac and cheese and whatever can be made in one pot while working," I admitted honestly. "Sounds efficient and practical, better than what I'm doing." She laughed, stirring something that looked promising. "Elias keeps telling me to hire a chef for these things, but I wanted tonight to feel like family, not a catered event." We worked side by side, and gradually I felt my shoulders unknot. She asked about Amara's school with genuine interest, and shared stories about Cassian's childhood that made him seem less like a billionaire, and more like a regular kid who'd once gotten stuck in a tree. "He was always trying to fix things," Lydia said fondly, chopping vegetables with practiced efficiency. "Even things that didn't need fixing or were too broken to be fixed. I think that's why he took losing you so hard. He couldn't fix it, couldn't solve it like a business problem with logic and strategy." The honesty caught me off guard. I wasn't trying to solve a problem that needed solving. "You weren't a problem at all," she said gently, pausing her work to look at me directly. "You were a young woman in an impossible situation, making the best choice you could with the information you had. I don't blame you for that, Angela. Neither does Elias. We just hope we get a chance to be better this time around, to support instead of adding pressure." The following Tuesday, everything changed with one camera flash. Cassian had taken Amara to the Children's Museum, an indoor activity since rain had cancelled their park plan. They were at the dinosaur exhibit, Amara standing on her toes to see the massive skeleton, when a man with a professional camera started shooting rapid fire. Not the casual parent photography that filled the museum, but rapid-fire shots with a telephoto lens and professional equipment. Cassian noticed immediately, his security awareness kicking in. He positioned himself between the camera and Amara, but not before the photographer got several clear shots. Harper Lane appeared from where she'd been giving them space. Cassian had insisted on having security present, but unobtrusive for outings with Amara. She intercepted the photographer with the efficiency of someone who'd handled this situation before. "Sir, this is private property with a no-harassment policy. I'm going to need you to delete those photos immediately." "Public figure, in a public space," the photographer countered with practiced arrogance. "First Amendment rights, private museum with posted photography policies," Harper replied smoothly, already on her phone. "And that child has a right to privacy. Museum security is on their way, and if those photos appear anywhere, you'll be facing legal action for photographing a minor without guardian consent." The situation was diffused quickly, the photographer escorted out, but the damage was potentially done. Those photos could already be uploaded to cloud storage, already spreading across the internet. That evening, Cassian showed up at my apartment unannounced, Harper trailing behind with a tablet full of legal documents. "We need to talk," he said, and my blood went cold. Amara was already asleep, my mother reading in the living room. We sat at my small kitchen table, Cassian, Harper and me, while Harper pulled up the photos that hadn't been published yet, but easily could be. "We managed to contain it this time," Harper explained in her crisp, professional tone. "The photographer was freelance, hoping to sell to tabloids. We've made it clear that any publication would face immediate legal action for photographing a minor without guardian consent. But it's going to happen again," Cassian said heavily. "Now that people know I have a daughter, they're going to look for her. For both of you. The story is too good. Secret child, 7 years hidden, working-class mother. It's tabloid gold." He pulled out paperwork, privacy agreements, security protocols, media strategies. The words blurred together: non-disclosure, protective orders, controlled narrative, image rights, privacy protections. "Stop." My voice came out harder than intended. "Just stop." I stood abruptly, needing space, needing air that didn't smell like legal documents and corporate control. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Cameras following my daughter, legal documents about her existence, strategies for controlling how the world sees her like she's a product to be managed. "Angela." "No." I rounded on him, 7 years of fear and protection boiling over. "This is why I didn't chase you down 7 years ago. Because your world does this. It turns people into assets to be managed, into problems to be solved, into headlines to be controlled. My daughter is not a media strategist. She's not a narrative to spin. She's a 7-year-old who should be worried about homework and playground friendships, not photographers and privacy agreements. I'm trying to protect her." Cassian stood too, frustration breaking through his usual composure. "This is what protection looks like in my world. I can't make the cameras go away by wishing, but I can make sure they don't hurt her or exploit her." "Your world shouldn't have to be her world," I shot back. "She was fine before. You were barely surviving." The words exploded from him, louder than I'd ever heard him speak. "You were working yourself to death, literally to death, one medical emergency away from leaving our daughter orphaned. But sure, you were fine. Everything was fine." The silence that followed was deafening. Harper quietly excused herself, citing phone calls she needed to make, leaving us alone in the wreckage of our argument. I'm terrified, Cassian said finally, his voice dropping to something raw and honest, stripped of all business polish. Every second of every day, I'm terrified that you'll decide this is too much, that my world is too dangerous, too invasive, too damaging to expose Amara to, that you'll shut me out again. And this time I'll deserve it because I brought this chaos into your lives. The admission took the wind from my anger. I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted by the constant vigilance, the constant fear, the weight of trying to protect everyone from everything. I'm terrified too, I admitted quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm terrified that your world will swallow my daughter whole, and I'll be reduced to a footnote in her story. The mother who couldn't keep up, the one who didn't fit, that she'll grow up choosing wealth over values, appearances over authenticity, that I'll lose her to a life I can't understand or compete with. He sat across from me, the cheap kitchen table between us feeling like miles and inches simultaneously. So what do we do? He asked, and I heard the genuine question underneath, not rhetorical but real. We agree on boundaries, I said slowly, thinking it through as I spoke. No public announcements about her until she's old enough to understand and consent to what that means. Private school is absolutely necessary for security reasons, but not boarding school. She lives with me, she comes home to me every night. Limited social media presence, controlled circles of who knows about her connection to you and your family. I can work with that, he agreed immediately, relief visible in his shoulders. And as she gets older, she gets more say in all of this. This is about protecting her childhood, not controlling her life or deciding her future. Harper's privacy agreements. Only for household staff and anyone in direct, regular contact with Amara who might be approached by the media. Not for your friends, your family, people in your normal life. I won't make you turn your world into a lockdown fortress. We hammered out details until nearly midnight, a framework for navigating two worlds that had collided unexpectedly. It wasn't perfect, it wouldn't solve everything, but it was a foundation we could build on. That night, around 2 in the morning, the flutter started. Not painful like the collapse, but unmistakable. My heart deciding to skip beats like a scratched record, like it was forgetting its own rhythm. I sat up slowly, reaching for the medications on my nightstand, trying not to panic because panic made it worse. The flutter passed after a few minutes, but it left me shaken, sweating, terrified. Dr. Harding had said to call if it happened again. It was too late to call now, but tomorrow I'd have to report it, probably face more tests. A soft knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Cassian stood in the doorway. He'd insisted on staying over on the couch after our late discussion, claiming it was too late to drive home safely. I heard you moving around, he said quietly. You okay? Just the heart thing, minor flutter. It's fine now, it's not fine. He moved into the room without asking permission, sitting on the edge of my bed like he'd done 1,000 times in another life. Did you take your medication? Yes, Dr. Crow, I said with weak sarcasm. I'm staying here tonight, he said firmly, brooking no argument. Not asking permission this time. If something happens again, you need someone here who can help or call for help. He grabbed a pillow from the bed and settled into the small chair by the window, clearly uncomfortable but stubborn. Somewhere in the shuffle, he'd changed into an old hoodie I'd found in a box for him, soft and worn from our college days. At 3 in the morning, I was still awake, my heart now beating normally but my mind racing with possibilities and fears. The room was dark except for the streetlight filtering through thin curtains, casting everything in amber and shadow. Cassian had fallen asleep in the chair, his head tilted at an angle that would definitely hurt his neck tomorrow, his breathing deep and even. He looked younger like this, unguarded. Less. Billionaire CEO, more the boy who'd shared ramen and dreams with me in a world that seemed simpler in retrospect. We'd been apart for 7 years. Strangers who'd made a child together, and then lost each other to silence and assumptions. And now we were rebuilding something from the scattered pieces of who we used to be. "Cassian!" My voice was barely a whisper in the darkness, but he stirred immediately, alert in the way of someone who'd been sleeping lightly. "Your heart?" He was half out of the chair before I could answer. "No, I'm okay. I paused, searching for words in the darkness where truth seemed easier. "Why are you really doing all this? The medical bills, the schedule rearranging, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs, dealing with my fear and resistance. You could write a check and hire people to handle everything, so why are you here?" He settled back slowly, running a hand through his hair. For a long moment I thought he might be deflecting and give me the practical answer about responsibility and co-parenting. But this was 3 in the morning, that strange hour when defense is lower and truth slips through the cracks. "I built an empire," he said finally, his voice quiet in the darkness. "Grew my biological father's company into something that touches 6 continents, employs thousands of people. I've closed billion-dollar deals, been on magazine covers, had economists analyze my strategies in business schools. And you know what I realized the night I got that call from Amara?" He looked directly at me, his eyes catching the streetlight, reflecting something vulnerable and honest. None of it meant anything. Not a single achievement, not one success story, not one award or recognition. Because I'd lost the only things that actually mattered, you and a daughter I didn't even know existed. I spent 7 years telling myself I was being successful, when really I was just being alone and calling it ambition. His voice dropped even lower. "I never stopped loving you, Angela. I just forgot how to be brave about it. I convinced myself that letting you go was noble, that you were better off without the chaos of my life. But it was just fear dressed up as self-sacrifice, cowardice disguised as protection." He gestured toward Amara's room, where our daughter slept peacefully, unaware of the adult conversations happening in the darkness. "Now, watching you breathe, knowing our daughter is safe in the next room, being allowed to be part of your lives even in small ways, that means more than any deal I've ever closed. This is what matters. You two are what matters. Everything else is just noise." The confession hung between us, heavy with possibility and caution, and 7 years of what-ifs. I could feel the pull toward him, that old magnetic attraction that had never quite died despite 7 years and mountains of hurt. "I still love you too," I admitted quietly into the darkness. I don't know if I ever stopped, or if I just buried it under survival mode and single parenting and fear. But Cassian, we can't just pick up where we left off. Too much has happened. We're different people now than we were at 22. "I know." He shifted in the chair, wincing slightly at his cramped position. "I'm not asking to rush back into something we don't even know if we can rebuild. I'm just asking to try, slowly, carefully, with our eyes open this time." "What does that look like?" "It looks like focusing on what needs to come first," he said thoughtfully. "Your health, making sure you're actually recovering, not just surviving day to day. Amara's stability, giving her time to adjust to having a father without destabilizing everything else in her world. And honest communication. No more filling silence with assumptions. If we're scared, we say it. If we need something, we ask. No more running away when things get hard." "No more running," I agreed. We sat in comfortable silence after that, the kind we used to share in our tiny apartment when words weren't necessary. Eventually he stood, crossing to the bed with careful movements. "Move over," he said gently. I raised an eyebrow in question. "I'm sleeping on top of the covers, fully clothed, because that chair is destroying my spine and I'm too old to pretend it isn't." He positioned himself carefully on the far edge of the bed, maintaining respectful distance. "Is this okay? It shouldn't have been. We weren't together. We were barely figuring out co-parenting and rebuilding trust. But having him there, close enough to reach if my heart decided to flutter again, felt safer than I wanted to admit. Okay, I whispered. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm, a new normal built from small moments and careful choices. Tuesday mornings meant cardiology appointments. Dr. Harding monitored my progress with cautious optimism. The medication was working, the lifestyle changes were helping, and slowly, steadily, my heart was learning to beat without rebellion. Cassian drove me to every appointment, waiting in the lobby with work on his laptop and coffee he'd learned I liked. Too much cream, 1 sugar. Small details he was relearning about me. Amara grew comfortable moving between worlds in a way only children can manage. She'd spend weekends at the penthouse, where Lydia taught her to bake cookies from scratch, and Elias showed her how the stock market worked using candy as visual aids. Then she'd come home to our apartment, perfectly content with our boxed mac and cheese and laundromat symphony. Grandma Lydia says proper cookies need vanilla extract, she'd announced seriously. But Grandma Rosa says love is the most important ingredient, and you can't buy that at stores, so both are important. She'd call Rosa when she wanted comfort food and stories about me as a child. She'd call Lydia when she had questions about architecture books Elias had started buying her. At board meetings, Cassian kept a drawing Amara had made tucked inside his laptop, a family portrait in her careful hand. Mummy, me, and Dad written across the top in purple crayon. Colleagues who'd known him for years noticed the change. He smiled more, left on time for dinner commitments he wouldn't explain, seemed less driven by proving something and more settled in who he was. Rosa and Lydia had developed an unlikely friendship, trading recipes and cultural traditions over weekly phone calls that could last hours. Rosa taught Lydia her mother's cooking techniques. Lydia shared her grandmother's baking secrets. They'd become allies rather than competitors for Amara's affection. Looking back now, I can see the lessons this whole chaotic, beautiful mess taught me. Lessons I wish I'd known 7 years ago. First, don't let fear speak louder than your words. Cassian and I created a 7-year wound because we assumed instead of asking, because we let pride and fear fill the silence where honest conversation should have been. One difficult phone call, one moment of vulnerability could have changed everything, but we were too scared to have it. Second, doing your best in a hard moment still counts, even if you do it differently now. I made choices as a terrified 22-year-old that I might not make today with more experience and resources, but I kept my daughter safe, loved, and provided for with what I had. That matters. You don't have to be perfect to be enough. Third, money and power don't make hard conversations easier. Cassian could buy solutions to almost any problem, but he still had to sit in a hospital room and ask if his daughter would accept him. Wealth didn't shield him from vulnerability or fear. Everyone is human underneath the bank balance. Fourth, supportive families are built, not automatically given. Rosa and Lydia didn't have to become friends. Elias didn't have to defer to my parenting choices. They chose to build something together for Amara's sake. Family isn't just biology. It's the daily choice to show up. And fifth, children deserve carefully told truths, not heavy silence. Amara handled learning about her father far better than I'd feared because we told her age-appropriate truth with love. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for when we trust them with honesty. That accidental phone call, Amara's panicked voice asking the digital assistant for Grandma Rosa and reaching Cassian instead, didn't just save my physical life, though it certainly did that. It ripped open 7 years of carefully maintained avoidance. It forced conversations we'd been too scared to have. It gave all of us, me, Cassian, Amara, our families, a chance at something better than what we'd been settling for. Second chances aren't neat. They don't come with guarantees or instruction manuals or happy ending promises. They're messy and complicated and require more courage than getting it right the first time. But sometimes they're worth every terrifying step. Cassian and I are taking things slowly. Some nights he stays for dinner and helps Amara with homework. Some weekends we all go to the park together, looking like the family we're carefully becoming. We haven't defined what we are to each other beyond co-parents, but there's a tenderness growing in the spaces between. Held hands when I'm nervous at doctor's appointments, his jacket around my shoulders when evenings get cold, goodnight texts that say more than the simple words suggest. We're rebuilding. Not what we had before. That's gone, buried under years and choices we can't undo, but something new. Something stronger, maybe, because it's built on honesty instead of assumption, on showing up instead of running away. If you're watching this and you're hiding a hard truth because you're scared, whether it's about a child, a relationship, a mistake you made years ago, consider this your sign. The fear won't get smaller with time, the conversation won't get easier by waiting, and the people involved deserve the truth, even when it's complicated and uncomfortable and might change everything. You're allowed to admit you were scared. You're allowed to change your mind about decisions you made in desperate moments. You're allowed to reach out, even after years of silence, and say I was wrong, or I need help, or I still care. The worst that happens is you end up where you already are. The best that happens, you get your second chance. Before you go, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment telling me which lesson from this story hit you hardest. Was it the part about fear speaking louder than words? The reminder that doing your best is enough? Or something else entirely? I read every comment, and your perspectives make these stories richer. If you believe in second chances, if you think people deserve the opportunity to show up better than they did before, hit that like button right now. And if you know someone who needs the courage to face a hard truth, someone who's been running from a difficult conversation, share this video with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that it's never too late to be brave. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep, real, lesson-packed story. Because life is messy and complicated, and we're all just trying to figure it out together. My name is Angela Steele. My heart is beating stronger now, not just on the monitors, but in the choices I make every day. Choices to be honest, to show up, to let people in, even when it's terrifying. Because sometimes, the best things in life come from the calls we never meant to make, from the accidents that force us to face what we've been running from the courage to try again when every logical reason says to give up. That little missed dial saved my life in more ways than one. What will yours be?